Thank you. It's lovely being here. Thank you for the invite. So we are going to be talking about a lot of nerdy stuff. I started working as a typeface designer in 2012 after graduating from the University of Reading in the UK, where I received my master's in typeface design. I've always focused on developing typefaces for underserved writing systems, mainly from the Indian subcontinent. In 2016, as Kenneth mentioned, I started my own foundry with my Icelandic partner, and we called it Universal Thirst. So this talk is about what it means to be a typeface design or a typeface designer working towards marginalized writing systems in kind of modern graphic design, in the modern graphic design environment. When I graduated, there weren't a lot of jobs, and so I became a font engineer, and most of my day looks like this. I don't look at any letters. I'm looking at the terminal and lots of spreadsheets and lots of QA documents. So I'm going to talk about typeface design in this context, because all of the work that we do requires a lot of context from linguistics, from computational history or just computer science history, and then of course it touches visual culture from the subcontinent. So I'm going to start with some history and context about Indic writing systems, because I need to introduce you or give you a primer on what or how they are different from the Latin writing system before we move into the specifics of it. So this is the Indian subcontinent, which includes Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and of course India. And that pin is where I am from, in Western India, from the state of Gujarat. India has more than 300 writing systems and more than 760 languages, but these are the 10 main languages, and they are spread across roughly across the area where the name has been overlaid. And this is the amount of level 1 speakers of the languages. It's in the tens of millions. Not just speakers, users. India is also one of the countries that has the highest amount of newspapers published in regional languages, and they're published in all of these languages. So suffice to say, there are lots of users of these writing systems. All the Indian writing systems come from an ancient writing system called the Brahmi script, and it kind of branches into all of these different modern writing systems that we know today, and they differ slightly from one another, but the orthography, the logic of the orthography is more or less the same. And I'm going to introduce you to the logic of the Devanagari writing system, which is one of the most common writing systems in South Asia. So in the Latin alphabet, you have a linear representation of graphemes. So one letter after the other, except for in cases where you're using accents, and then you have accents to kind of express tone or a change in vowel tone. And this is and the Latin is a syllabic writing or alphabetic writing system. All of the South Asian writing systems are known as alpha syllabaries or abugidas, which means that you don't, there is no spelling convention. You essentially write the way you pronounce. So the sound is represented to the atomic level of the grapheme. And the way this works is on the left you have the Latin, of course, and on the right you have the Devanagari script in Hindi or showing words that are in Hindi, and they are translations of the words. So stick is lathi, translation is anuvad, and assured is sunishchit. And when you break it down into consonants and vowels, you can very clear, the consonants vowels are very clearly defined in the Latin. They are at the same orthographic hierarchy as the consonant. What happens in Brahmi-based writing systems is that the vowels take on an orbital form. So they will attach to a consonant to change the sound. So la, ti, you can see the bits in red are the vowels that are then attached to the consonant. And they can be after the consonant, they can be before the consonant, like in the last syllable in the word at the top. They can be under. And yeah, so it's they called orbital signs. We like to call them orbital signs because they can go all over the place. And this made typesetting very complicated. And there are many reasons why typesetting was complicated. One of the reasons is that a lot of the type technologies that evolved with the Latin writing system in mind. So all of your old letterpress printing, all of those technologies are based on this very linear, very compressed, very an orthography where there are repetition of shapes. And because, of course, also because of the depression of the global south, you don't have a lot of indigenous technologies being developed to kind of represent these complex writing systems. And as a result, in the early cold metal foundry type, you have analogs of all of these writing systems represented under under the kind of the Latin metal type. And these are two ways of composing Indic type, or this is Devanagari, and you can see that the vowels and the modifiers are separate from the consonant. On the right is what is known as the degree system, and on the left is what is known as the Akhand system. And the difference are essentially in type size. So if you had type sizes more than 22, 24 point, you would use the degree system because it has lots of little parts that you combine together. You can imagine if you were a type compositor in the, in the 20s or the 30s putting together like a volume of a 600-page volume. Imagine typesetting in Devanagari, and like a lot of it has been done. So to kind of ameliorate all of that hard work at smaller sizes, a separate system was invented known as the Akhand system, where the body was full and you'd have ligatures kind of created in metal. You'd also have overhang. So you can see in the last one, there is like a little metal overhang. This would break quite often. So you had to, when you ordered Devanagari type, you would order an extra batch of the E-matras. So whenever you snapped it, you replaced it with a replacement. Replacement was easy. And this is this is another writing system where I am from in India, Gujarati. It's very funny because along with the analogs of printing, terminology was borrowed as well. So here it says uppercase in the subtitle, and all of you know uppercase, lowercase comes from kind of this skeuomorphic thing of there actually being drawers. In case of Indic type, you needed like 8 drawers. So uppercase and lowercase didn't really make sense, but because they didn't have terminology, there were 4 uppercases and 4, lower cases. But you can see that all of the consonant vowel combinations are represented as an individual metal type, and that's the Akhand system. And it made typesetting quite cumbersome. And this is what the typesetting kind of looked like in cold metal. This is a specimen of 24-point Gujarati, and you can see a lot of issues that are being caused by the materialization of type. So all of the gaps that you see there are a result of metal not being able to overlap shapes. And these technically need to overlap because it represents a combination of 2 consonants. So gusso, the first word means anger, and you can see there the gusso, the double S is supposed to be together, and that's where it's breaking because of the metal type. And then we had, after cold metal, we had hot metal composition, which was machine composition. So you no longer had to, stand over a box of type and compose it. You had a keyboard composition machine, and it would kind of automatically compose type. But then that had its own limitations. This is a sample of Linotype Gujarati from the 40s, and the Linotype slug composition machine meant that you didn't have any room to kern letter forms, even in the Latin alphabet. And not only that, you had no room to overhang. So you can see the matras have been designed to be vertical because they can't have them horizontal. And this was not a very well received design in India, and it hasn't, maybe a couple of books were printed using this design, but it's not been seen very widely. The alternative to that was the Monotype composition caster, which was a competitor at the time, and they had a different kind of compositing system, but they had a character set limitation. So you could only represent the characters that would fit in this matrix. Anything beyond this was either left out, or there was a different way that the final grapheme was put together. In Gujarati's case, this meant that a lot of very wide characters could not be fit in a single matrix unit. So they had to be composed using 2 characters. And I have an example of this. So if you look at the first letter, the ma, the M, you can see like a little gap in there. So that has been composed using a half M and a vowel sign, an A vowel sign. And that made it even worse because now you had even more gaps in printing types. And this was basically the best you could do with complex writing systems and print them up until the digital revolution, which brings us to current practice. So here's a picture of Gujarati metal type. This is exactly the 24-point type that you saw from cold metal earlier. And the thing is that digital type is kind of a dematerialized analog to past technologies. Even for the Latin script, there is what we call the bounding box, which was essentially what in metal type was the height of the type. And you have kind of ascender, descender, all of these kind of analogs that are not really required in digital type, but kind of come through anyway. So that's Linotype Gujarati, the digital version. And the bunch of things that digital type affords us is overlaps. So here you can see this is Glyphs is a industry standard software we used to develop fonts, and you can see that we can now do a lot more overlapping. So there's not a lot of gaps anymore. The other thing is type is scalable, so you don't have size specific things, and you can typeset stuff easily, break things easily, fix them easily. However, there are certain considerations when it comes to what type looks like. So when you're typing a bunch of Latin text, it's linear, you can delete stuff, you can add stuff. Compared to this example of Telugu, which is a writing system from South India, this is a typeface we designed for Google Sans Telugu for their brand font. And you can see that based on the context of the letters that come before and after, the base character changes or the post character changes to kind of supplement what it belongs to. And of course, there is an inherent complexity to the writing system, but there are lots of implications to how you think about visual language. So if you want to do, for example, a simple animation where letters appear one after the other, and that's like a simple animation for maybe a title sequence, something like that. How would you do that for Telugu? Because if it was based on a per character input sequence, you have like things changing as they appear. So you have to pre-compose the line of text and then make it appear as pre-composed bit by bit. So there's lots of ways of thinking that need to be adjusted to the peculiarities of the writing system. Also, a very important aspect of developing fonts is that, and I'm going to step out of this because I want to show you this. is that when someone's designing a Latin typeface, it's relatively easy to test and check. Essentially, you fill in the cells in glyphs, you generate the font, you install the font, and you can type something and it works. In Indic fonts, you cannot do that because none of the complex combinations will appear. So there is a secondary step of font engineering that's required to write shaping code, which then tells the computer that, okay, if k plus k, if you see k plus k, it should give you that grapheme. And what that does is it greatly explodes the character sets. So for Telugu, for the writing system you saw just before this one, character sets can range from 700 glyphs to about 1200 glyphs. And that, when you're designing something like that over 5 weights, you have to design 2 masters and then interpolate and fix a lot of problems in the middle. So the development time for complex writing systems is greatly protracted as compared to developing fonts for Latin. This is an example of a test document. So we were asked last year to redesign Notosan's Bengali. There was a lot of issues with the Bengali and they wanted to commission a completely new design. So this is our very simple test to make sure all of the combinations work as they are expected to. So the first test is a very basic Unicode character test where you have all the consonants, all the independent vowels, all the dependent vowels, all the modifiers, numerals, etc. And then you start testing the combinations. So this is a double consonant combination. So all of these are double consonant sounds. You have consonant vowel ligatures. So there are ligatures that are combined with consonants to completely form new forms. We then have to also make sure that all of the mark positioning is working. So this is the U matra, the U vowel. And you have to test it with every possible combination. So you're multiplying the amount of grapheme. So it's consonant plus vowel, or consonant plus vowel, or consonant plus consonant plus consonant plus vowel, or consonant plus consonant plus consonant plus vowel plus modifier. So all of this kind of, if you can see the scroll on the, like I've gone, it's like, it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep, yeah. So there are tests that, and then this is just the regular, and then I go into the thin, and then I have to test the thin. And then I go into the black and test the black, and so on and so forth. So, and of course we have spacing tests and tests to check text and what it looks like. So this is a random excerpt from Wikipedia to make sure that whatever text you throw at it is rendered correctly. I think the amount of work that is undertaken is kind of commensurate to the population. So Bengali speakers are about 256 million. There's not only a level 1 speaker base that's in India and in Bangladesh, but there is a level 2 language base that's all of the Bengali diaspora that lives around the world, who interact with the languages. And one of the things that I love as being a new BC resident is if you ever get mail from either the NDP, in my case, I live in an NDP riding, so if you ever get a mail from NDP or from the city of Vancouver, you'll have like 7 scripts explaining what the mail is about. And I feel like that's a great way to promote inclusion, language inclusion, because it's very important to have all of this important information out there for language perspective. But you'll see the quality of the typefaces, and there is a lot to kind of expect there. But we'll get there. We'll have people will find typefaces and take better decisions. So this is kind of a typical test for a font development project. So my job is doing all of this stuff. I tend to do design from time to time, but I am kind of setting up these documents, making sure the documents are right, going through all of the tests and giving feedback to the engineers and the designers to make sure if anything's breaking, to fix it. So go back to the presentation. So knowing all of this and working with all of this, we kind of realized that a lot of the work, I'll talk a little bit about the business side of things. So we have, well, I've established that we have a large population in need or in need for typographic expression, or like a lot of different kinds of typographic expression, which we did have. We have a very vibrant sign painting visual culture. So if you're ever in India, if you're walking around the streets, you'll see just brilliant lettering all over the place. And that's kind of I think it's the reason why that exists is because everything else looks so bland. Like all printed documents have just one typeface, and it's like the government websites look crap. It's like everything else was so crap that we end up decorating our trucks and our shop fronts and everything. All of that is very pretty. There was like a renaissance in lettering between the 20s and the 60s, where a lot of the periodicals from the subcontinent have gorgeous lettering. Just like just title lettering is amazing. Also the films. If you look at any of the Bollywood films, especially not the new ones, of course, but if you see like 90s and like go back, you'll see brilliant lettering. A great example of a good lettering artist. And now I forget the name, but it'll come to me later. Who's the famous Bengali director that everybody knows? Satyajit Ray. Satyajit Ray also designed 3 Bengali typefaces because he didn't have enough typefaces to set his film titles on. So he was kind of this Renaissance man who had like multiple skills. From the business perspective, we have a huge user base, but because of the subcontinent being financially and economically depressed for the last 300, 400 years, the Maslow's scale of hierarchy in India is not purchasing typefaces, right? There are lots of things before I'm going to purchase a license for a typeface, which makes it even more important for large-scale tech companies to invest in creating these typefaces as a part of critical infrastructure and linguistic infrastructure. And 90% of our well-paying work comes from doing custom projects, things like the Noto project, things like making brand fonts for Google and brand fonts for Apple, stuff like that, because they are able to put these fonts in all of the devices that everybody's using, and it makes typography a little bit better than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But what we realized is that a lot of this infrastructural work is very boring as well. It's basically creating typefaces that need to be as neutral as possible, need to be as Spartan as possible, and basically, be Helvetikas of of South Asia. What we do is we kind of borrowed an idea from Google, their 20% project, which I don't know if it still exists in Google. I need to ask somebody there. But Google Fonts started as a 20% project, and a 20% project is, as an engineer or as a designer, if you have an idea for a great project, you are allowed a day in a week to spend entirely on working on that project. I think Gmail was a 20% project. There are lots of 20% projects that have become massive core parts of Google. And we kind of borrowed from that, and within our practice, we offer one production day to the typeface designers to kind of design something that they want to see being represented as a form of typographic expression. And as a result, there are certain financial incentives to them because they also receive a 20% lifetime royalty on that, a lot of other things. But we saw some fun stuff, and I want to show some of the fun stuff that was generated out of that 20% project, and stuff that is now available for everybody to license. Namrata Goyal, a designer who works with us, took inspiration from these book covers that I was talking about earlier, and there was this very modular Devanagari design. And she was wondering what she could do, or how she could push the boundaries of legibility and readability by not only making the letter forms have no curves, but like expanding them into different stylistic and into different design spaces. So she started with this sketch of designing something that was extremely compressed, extremely tall, extremely compressed, extremely thin, extremely compressed, extremely heavy, or with high contrast, and things that had gaps in the middle, and so on and so forth. As the resident font engineer, it was my job to help her plan the project. And because this can quickly get out of hand, and we need to kind of make sure that we are designing the specification before we design the font. So this was the original idea, where we had there were 5 axes, but they were not meant to be axes at the time. They were meant to be standalone typefaces. And then this was right at the cusp of the introduction of variable typefaces, or the variable font technology, which made it possible for having kind of a wide gamut of design space in singular font. So after thinking about it a little bit more, this was what the design space ended up looking like. It has 5 axes, the typeface. It has a gutter axis, a cap axis, which controls either the shapes being flat or rounded. The slant axis, which goes minus 30 degrees back slant, minus 30 degrees forward slant, and then weight and the width axis, which are kind of common axes in most typefaces. And this is what the typeface looks like. So it's just one font file. If it were to be separate font files, it would be 352 fonts in one font. And it's not meant to be a typeface that's optimized for reading. It's more of an inquiry into how far can you push the legibility and the readability, and it's intended for designers to use it more as texture, so as kind of background, or as as pattern. And this is available at the moment on future fonts, because we are releasing it piecemeal. The current version does support a very large amount of Latin, so the Latin is kind of similarly complex, and you can set the type in it. The second project is this Tamil typeface, which was designed by Anaga Narayanan, another designer who worked with us in 2022, and it won the Best of Discipline at TDC 69 2 years ago. And it's essentially a typeface, or she asked herself, if she lived in the 70s and she was part of the psychedelic movement, how would she design Tamil? And that's this is a typeface that goes from top heavy to bottom heavy, and it has kind of the variable axes that kind of go between the two. The next typeface is OMA, and it's supposed to be kind of this retrofuturistic exploration on what Devanagari would look like on a NASA console. Should if NASA had user interfaces with Devanagari on them. And this also won in book or special mention at TDC 69. It currently supports Latin and Devanagari. And then we also do much shorter projects from time to time. This is a project we undertook for the British Museum partnership. This was for a permanent collection known as the South Asia Gallery, dedicated to artifacts from South Asia, like modern contemporary artifacts from South Asia. And it's part of a permanent collection at the Manchester Museum. And they wanted to represent the diaspora that or represent the scripts of the diaspora of all of the objects that have been included in the exhibit. So we have all of these writing systems, and we had a brilliant motion designer in the UK design the motion for switching between the writing systems. And if you ever go to Manchester Museum, this is on a large screen as you enter the exhibit, the animation there, which is great. Which brings me to kind of the other part of our work, which is to also write about and publish things on, it's right there, publish things about the history of typeface design and just typography in South Asia. And we published this online journal known as the Universal Thirst Gazette, where not only do we share things from our personal collections, things like specimens. You can see the second the Telugu specimen. We also have, so there is a great 3-part article on the development of Splinter, the complex pixel font that we showed and how it was developed. And also things about looking at actually creating new paradigms for South Asian typography. Like, what does it mean to have emphasis in these languages? Because up until now, we've been borrowing Western semantics of these, these things. So italic will be just a slanted italic, and that's emphasis and things like that. So there are some really interesting articles in there that explore that. And we also have interviews with design principals or design legends from the region. So Mahendra Patel was one of the first designers from India to work with Adrian Frutiger in his atelier in Paris. And they developed Frutiger Devanagari, which is now available on Monotype, on Monotype's website. But those are some of the early sketches for Frutiger Devanagari on the back that he designed in the 60s, in the late 60s. He still teaches. He's 88, and he's a professor emeritus at NID and teaches all around India, just letterform design, which is great. So if you have some time, please go and look at the resource. It's a way to kind of make design histories or lesser known design histories more accessible to people who won't know about it. As part of the documents, all of these are like extremely high resolution images. So you can download them, and if you wanted to revive this design, you can download the things and create a design based on this specimen. And then the emphasis. So there was the designer Lippy who wrote the article was kind of looking at the different ways of thinking about what emphasis would look like in Devanagari. And when I looked at this, it seemed a bit silly. Because my brain is not tuned to anything outside of the expected, so it feels a bit silly to me. But then when she showed me that she had found examples for all of these in use, that kind of blew my mind, because that means that we have a huge amount of typographic exploration to kind of apply to in these typefaces. This example is where there are two completely different styles for the upright and the italic. Or it may not even be in italic, it's an upright and a handwritten form, and that could be the emphasis. There is a back slant in some cases. There's an extreme slant with like extreme weight. This was a printer error. A PostScript printer error, but it was very nice. But then we found that not only did it exist in analog, it was the other way. So you had a back slant, individual character rotation with color and with drop shadow emphasis in use. This is with a squiggly headline, which is one example at the top. This is an example from one of those iconic book cover designs from the 90s. And then we have these beautiful pieces of work from hand-painted lettering with squiggly headlines. A very heavy Shirorekha as a way to emphasize. Again here, this is a digital font that exists, and a double-stroked Shirorekha. This I found when she showed me a mock-up of this. I found this to be utterly hilarious because it would look really weird in text. But here it is, from a manuscript from 300 years ago. And then also on a book cover with the things. yeah, so lots of places to find great inspiration for new typefaces. Yeah, that's it. That's the work we do at Universal Thirst. You can write to me at kalapi@universalthirst.com if you don't use Meta platforms. Sorry, I didn't include my email there. But for the rest, I mean, if you want, you can see there's a lot more work published on the Instagram account, so you can see a lot more of that here. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kalapi. That was so great. Yeah, I feel really energized after seeing that. It was a lot of fun. And also my job feels a lot easier all of a sudden. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Thanks, Kalapi. Just like what Kenneth was saying is impressive. Like I was speechless, and I always thought that, a lot of people always ask, like, how many do we still need to create more fonts, right? That's the typical comments that we have. But yes, we do. Maybe not so much on the Latin type, but for these type of things, right? Like I went to Thailand last month, looking at like those fonts and stuff. It's no clue about what's happening, but this is quite an eye opener on like, I think the Noto. I guess the question is like, how long did it take you to create those things?
The Noto. So any project that's kind of a simple project, like when I say simple, I mean boring, where kind of those boring text font projects with about 5 weights and just single upright style is about a year, just over a year, about maybe 16 months, maybe 15
It looks like a Sagrada Familia, it's like hundreds of years to build.
Yeah, we work. I'm very lucky that we have a great bunch of colleagues, very talented, very focused, and very kind of. This is a niche within a niche within a niche. Graphic design is already a niche, and then typography and typeface design, but then typeface design for, underserved writing systems, and then engineering for underserved writing systems. Really, that's what where my ADHD took me naturally. It's like, yeah. And that's where I'm like the easy. But yeah, it's something like that with the more expressive styles. It takes less time because there is not a lot of pattern management that we need to do because it's more there's more expression, so we can be a little bit loose with, for example, the psychedelic typeface can have differences, in letters that even look similar. It's just inherent to the design. But yeah, it can take about again depends on the writing system. So Gurmukhi, for example, a North Indian writing system, but underwent a lot of reform in the 1700s, and as a result has only 121 characters. It's faster to make a Gurmukhi font than Latin. Or Latin if you, want to support anything other than English, of course. English is just 26 and the letter, like the numbers. So, of course, it's not. So Bengali takes a lot of time because lots of different sorts. And the Tamil and Gurmukhi are on the other end where you have about 120 to 150 characters and you can do something pretty quickly. Which is why I was quite happy for the designer to do the psychedelic Tamil because it had 9 masters, all of them different from one another, which meant that there are 9 different typefaces essentially. But we were able to do that quite quickly because the character sets were not as big and as demanding.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, Kalapi. Thank you so much for your talk. I was really blown away. So you compared Latin, like English, and you showed it's very linear, right? Like letter, 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 and then they're not changing. But then you showed other languages where like you can see every time it's changing like so much. So how does that make people of that culture like relate differently or communicate differently?
That's a very interesting question, and it's a question that I had not really thought about until about 2 years ago, where I came across this work or a book. I don't remember it, but it's just because I'm on the spot right now. I'll remember it as soon as I'm done with this. But it's a book about how the concept of space didn't exist in Indian writing systems. So if you look at even Devanagari manuscripts, there are no spaces there because the spaces are implied from the language. The spaces are a modern kind of addition to all of the South Asian languages, and it started when European missionaries started printing in South Asia. So, and of course, this is related to your question in the sense that from a visual perspective, you look at type and the way you read and the way you interact with it makes a difference with the punctuation. In a lot of the Indic scripts cases, punctuation is not required. It is kind of built into the impact the language has on how you speak. So when you're kind of developing or creating communication in these scripts, there is definitely some amount of completely different contextualizations of ideas that you're trying to, all this to say that I don't think there is like active thought behind doing any of this currently, especially in like the commercial aspect of typography. But there is a lot of writing about this, about what it means to, for a population to suddenly wake up and see spaces between words. And that is literally what happened in Gujarati. The writing system that I, like my mother tongue, the first sample of printed Gujarati was in 1797 in a newspaper in Bombay called the Bombay Gazette, I want to say. And it was just like a tiny little piece of text in the commercial section of the thing, and you see another example of that in like an issue like a couple of months later, and then that century turns, it becomes 1800, and suddenly you have spaces between words. And this is of course because a very small amount of individuals controlled printing. So there was nobody had a voice to kind of say, oh, why do we have spaces? No, you just lived with it. So in the early 1800s, there was lots of this quick evolution of writing systems that is happening, because we are also in India around that time starting to realize that within a century we may get independent, which then means that we need to start working on a national identity. We need to talk about what the national language and the national script is, which is still not determined, and it's a very controversial topic. But yeah, I think that's a very important question, and there is a lot of writing, like native writing, on this in these languages about all of this stuff. So the more I find about it, the more we'll write on the Gazette and see what it means. But right now it's more of like at least in like capitalist spaces, use of South Asian writing systems is more of like a fiduciary requirement, where there will be certain provincial governments which require a business to have multilingual signage, for example, and there you need that. And if you are a business that has the extra money to kind of commission somebody to create a piece of lettering that matches your Latin lettering, then great. Otherwise, they're using Noto Sans Devanagari, and it looks completely different from the Latin, lettering. So that's the extent of it. But you see a lot of expression in hand-painted type. So if you're ever in India, take a lot of pictures of that, because all of that is kind of getting phased out by flex printing and like vinyl printing, things like that. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, and we had one over here.
I have a couple questions, if I can ask. So the first one I have is because of the just continuation, that no spaces, and you also mentioned the commas and periods. So do you have a combination of the uppercase and lowercase in the same because I haven't like noticed like some
Yeah.
of the.
No, it's a they're all Unicase.
So Unicase,
Yeah,
or that's
yeah.
the thing.
They're all
yeah.
Unicase writing systems. Yeah.
So is it all either uppercase or is it just Unicase? Everything.
So the orthography kind of is divided into what is the way I talked about orbital signs. There is a planet and then there are the orbital signs. So the consonants are seen as kind of the grounding forms. And they determine the base character height. So that is kind of the base character height, and then you have accents going up, down, before and after. So there is no bicameral texture. There is no like multi-texture for. So the main thing is kind of the consonant in the middle, and then there are other things that happen to the consonant around it.
And I also noticed that when you kind of showed it all together in one page,
Yeah.
Some letters, they always have that horizontal line at the top,
Yeah.
and then some not. So
Yeah.
what's the difference?
Yeah,
between
so there are three, of the writing systems I showed you, there are three writing systems that use the top line, which is also known as the Shiro Rekha or the headline. Shiro literally means head. Gurmukhi, Bengali, and Devanagari. They're the three writing systems that have the headline. And then Gujarati, and then all of the southern Indian writing systems don't have a headline. So it's just a line that is used
But
as a way to-
even in the same kind of a text that you had like on a page, some characters didn't have that line at the top.
Yeah, so I think you may be talking about the Bengali text.
It was
So even in here. So for example,
Yeah, some
you don't
characters
have.
don't
Yeah,
have,
so
yeah.
it's just some characters that don't have the.
so
line.
it's not like a vowel or something. It's just
So in this case, this is a modifier, so it doesn't have a headline. These are numbers, numerals, so it doesn't have a headline. But there are definitely consonants that don't have a headline. Like this one, for example, has a partial headline. You can see it's like broken at the top and not connected. So the gh, that's the dh, sorry, does not have a headline. So even within, so here, for example, this is tra. Or nra, I think, and this doesn't have a headline. So there are certain cases where you may not have headline, and breaks the texture a little bit.
And a separate question is like with the experiments that you did, like with the psychedelic and so on. I'm just curious. I've never been in India, but is there a graffiti art where people are actually using the scripts to, or like, are there graffitis that are
Yes,
using?
so there's a lot of public art, a lot of like lettering that is in. There is subversive like subculture stuff, like essentially like graffiti and street art is a subculture. So there is that aspect of it, but then lettering in public spaces is a very Indian thing anyway. So it's not considered a subculture. It's very much part of the subculture. The way I showed you, like the back slanting letters, that's like a political party advertisement. It's not like somebody like being expressive. So because there is such a lack of using language so easily in written form, the best tools people have is to employ a sign painter and be like, hey, just paint this for me. And you will see that everywhere around you. So there's subculture part of it. So there are a lot more like people looking at it from an artistic perspective, and you'll see that part of it. But then there is very kind of just everyday lettering that is all over the place. That's just like advertisements or, just like religious text, just randomly plastered over stuff, like things like that. Yeah.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Kalapi. That was fantastic to see, and I'm really glad we have you here in Vancouver, and I'm really glad we had your talk at Type Brigade. Thank you again.
You're most welcome.